3 months ago, my parents looked me straight in the eye and said they couldn't afford to help with my graduation celebration trip because money was impossibly tight. Yesterday, I watched my sister Amanda's twin boys board a first-class flight to Disney World through her Instagram story. She posted it at 2:15 in the afternoon, showing Jake and Connor clutching their boarding passes with huge smiles. The timestamp burned into my memory. My parents claimed poverty while secretly funding my sister's luxury lifestyle. I didn't confront anyone immediately. Instead, I decided to investigate exactly how deep this deception went. I should probably start from the beginning, back when I still believed my parents were struggling financially. It was early March when I approached them about celebrating my MBA graduation. After 7 years of night school while working full-time as a junior accountant, I finally earned my degree from Northwestern. I wanted to take a week off and visit Ireland, something I'd dreamed about since childhood. My father, Robert, sat in his worn leather recliner, the same one he'd owned for 15 years, and shook his head with genuine sadness in his eyes. "Son, I wish we could help you celebrate properly, but we're barely keeping our heads above water right now." IR. My mother, Patricia, joined the conversation from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Your father's heart procedure last month cost us nearly $8,000, even with insurance. The cardiologist said he needs another surgery next year." I felt selfish for even asking. "Dad, I had no idea the medical bills were that severe. I can postpone the trip indefinitely." Robert reached over and patted my shoulder. "Devin, you've worked incredibly hard for this achievement. We're proud of you beyond words. But between my medical expenses and your mother's arthritis treatments, we're looking at bankruptcy if one more unexpected cost hits us." Patricia nodded solemnly. "The prescription medications alone cost us $400 monthly. My rheumatologist wants me to start a new treatment that insurance considers experimental. We're talking about another $600 every month." I immediately dropped the subject. My parents had sacrificed so much to help me through undergraduate school, and here they were facing a genuine health crisis. The last thing they needed was their son pressuring them for vacation money. Over the following weeks, they reinforced this narrative consistently. When I mentioned struggling with my student loan payments, my father grimaced. "I know it's difficult, but we simply cannot take on any additional financial obligations right now. We're already borrowing against our retirement savings." My mother added, "We've canceled our cable television, switched to generic groceries, and stopped eating out entirely. Every penny goes toward medical expenses or basic necessities." They painted such a convincing picture of financial hardship that I started bringing them groceries when I visited. I figured if they were truly struggling, the least I could do was help with food costs. They graciously accepted my contributions, thanking me profusely for understanding their situation. Meanwhile, whenever Amanda's name came up in conversation, my parents glowed with pride. "Your sister is doing wonderfully," Patricia would say. "She's become so responsible with money since having the twins. Gary got promoted to regional sales manager, and they're finally building up their emergency fund." Robert would nod approvingly. "Amanda always was the practical one. She budgets every dollar and never spends beyond her means. We could all learn from her financial discipline." These conversations stung more than I cared to admit. Growing up, Amanda had always been the golden child who could do no wrong, while I seemed to disappoint my parents constantly, despite working twice as hard for half the recognition. Now, even as adults, the pattern continued. She was the responsible one with perfect financial planning, while I was apparently the irresponsible son asking for handouts during their medical crisis. I tried to focus on my career instead of family dynamics. My accounting firm was considering me for a promotion to senior analyst, which would mean a substantial salary increase. I threw myself into work, hoping that financial success might finally earn me the same level of parental approval that Amanda seemed to receive effortlessly. Then came the day that shattered my entire understanding of reality. I was eating lunch at my desk, scrolling through social media during my break, when Amanda's Instagram story appeared on my screen. The first image showed her twin boys, 8-year-old Jake and Connor, standing in what was clearly an airport terminal. They were holding boarding passes and grinning from ear to ear. The second image made my stomach drop. It was a close-up shot of the boarding passes, and I could clearly see first class printed on both tickets. The destination was Orlando International Airport. The departure time was 3:30 that afternoon, which meant this was happening right now. The third image showed the boys walking through the first-class boarding line, their small backpacks bouncing as they skipped excitedly toward the gate. I stared at my phone screen, trying to process what I was seeing. First-class tickets to Orlando for 2 children cost at least $800 each, probably closer to $1,000. That meant Amanda had just spent at least $1,600 on airplane tickets alone for what was clearly a Disney World vacation. But my parents had claimed they couldn't afford groceries. They'd canceled cable television to save money. They were borrowing against their retirement savings to pay medical bills. Yet somehow, Amanda could afford to fly her children first class to the most expensive vacation destination in America. Something was terribly wrong with this picture. I clicked through Amanda's previous posts, looking for more clues. 3 weeks ago, she'd posted photos from a restaurant I recognized as one of the most expensive steakhouses in Chicago. The caption read, "Date night with my amazing husband." Sometimes you have to celebrate the good times. 2 months ago, she'd posted pictures of new furniture being delivered to her house. The living room set looked like it cost more than I made in 3 months. 6 months ago, there were photos from a ski trip to Aspen. Amanda and Gary were wearing brand new ski gear, and the resort in the background was definitely not budget accommodation. I felt physically sick. While my parents' guilt tripped me about asking for help with my student loans, my sister was living a lifestyle that most people could only dream about. Either Amanda was drowning in debt to maintain appearances, or my parents were lying to me about their financial situation. Given their consistent praise for Amanda's financial responsibility, I had a sinking feeling I knew which explanation was correct. I spent the rest of my lunch break staring at those boarding pass images, trying to make sense of the timeline. My parents claimed poverty in March. Amanda's family flew first class to Disney World in June. The math didn't add up unless there were significant financial resources that my parents weren't telling me about. For the first time in my adult life, I began to suspect that my parents might be deliberately deceiving me. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on anything except Amanda's Instagram posts. I kept returning to those boarding pass images, analyzing every detail. The first-class tickets, the expensive resort reservations she'd tagged in previous posts, the designer clothes the boys were wearing. None of it aligned with my parents' claims about their financial struggles. I decided to conduct a thorough investigation. My accounting background had taught me how to trace financial patterns, and I was determined to uncover the truth about my family's actual economic situation. I started by creating a detailed timeline of Amanda's social media posts over the past year. What I discovered made my blood run cold. January, a post from a luxury spa weekend in Scottsdale. The resort charged a minimum of $300 per night, and she'd tagged herself there for 4 days. February, pictures of the boys in brand new hockey equipment, including custom skates that cost at least $200 each. March, the same month my parents claimed poverty. Amanda posted photos from a wine tasting tour in Napa Valley. The tour company's website listed their premium packages at $450 per person. April, new granite countertops being installed in her kitchen. Professional installation of granite that size typically costs between $8,000 and $12,000. May, a family photo at a Chicago Bulls playoff game. Courtside seats during playoffs cost a minimum of $800 each. For a family of 4, that was over $3,000 for a single basketball game. June, the Disney World trip with first-class flights. I calculated the minimum amount Amanda had spent on discretionary items over 6 months. Even being conservative with my estimates, she'd blown through at least $25,000 on vacations, entertainment, and luxury purchases. That didn't include her mortgage, car payments, utilities, or basic living expenses. Either Amanda and Gary were earning far more money than anyone realized, or someone else was funding their lifestyle. I remembered my father's comment about Gary getting promoted to regional sales manager. I used my company's database access to research Gary's employer and typical salary ranges for his position. Regional sales managers at his company earned between $60,000 and $80,000 annually. Decent money, but nowhere near enough to support the spending patterns I'd documented. Amanda had been a part-time yoga instructor before having the twins, and she'd never returned to work after they were born. So Gary's income was their only legitimate source of funds unless they had substantial savings or financial help from family. My parents had always claimed they lived modestly on my father's retired teacher's pension and my mother's Social Security benefits. They owned their house outright, having paid off the mortgage years ago, but their monthly income couldn't exceed $4,000. Definitely not enough to support Amanda's extravagant lifestyle while simultaneously claiming poverty when I asked for basic help. Unless there was money coming from somewhere else? I decided to dig deeper into my family's financial history. I remembered my grandfather mentioning something about inheritance and trust funds before he passed away 5 years ago, but the details had always been vague. My parents handled all the estate matters, and I'd trusted them to manage everything properly. Now I was wondered if that trust had been misplaced. I spent the weekend researching public records and genealogy websites trying to piece together information about my grandparents' estate. What I found made me realize I needed professional help to fully understand the legal implications. But first, I had one more investigative avenue to explore. My parents had asked me to help them set up cloud photo storage on their devices last year, and I still had access to their shared account. They'd never changed the password because they barely understood how the technology worked. I felt guilty about violating their privacy, but I needed to know if my suspicions were correct. If they were truly struggling financially, while Amanda lived in luxury, I could live with the inequality. But if they were actively deceiving me about their resources, I deserved to know the truth. I logged into their cloud storage account and began scrolling through recent photos. What I found there destroyed every remaining shred of trust I had in my parents. The most recent folder was labeled Tuscany Adventure, May 2024. May was the exact month they'd claimed they couldn't afford groceries and were borrowing against retirement savings to pay medical bills. The first photo showed my parents standing in front of what was clearly an expensive Italian restaurant, both of them wearing new clothes and genuine smiles. My father looked healthier and happier than I'd seen him in years. The second photo was even more devastating. It showed Amanda, Gary, and the twins sitting at the same restaurant table with my parents. This wasn't just a secret vacation my parents had taken without telling me. It was a multi-generational family trip that included Amanda's entire family. I scrolled through dozens of additional photos, wine tastings in Tuscan vineyards, tours of Renaissance art museums, first-class hotel accommodations with marble bathrooms and balcony views, shopping expeditions where my mother had clearly purchased expensive Italian leather goods. The final photos in the folder showed the two families boarding their return flights. Amanda and the twins were sitting in first class while my parents had business class seats. Even the economy option for my parents had cost substantially more than most people spend on their entire annual vacation budget. I calculated the minimum cost for this trip. 10 days in Tuscany for 6 people, including international flights, luxury accommodations, guided tours, and restaurant meals. They'd spent at least $20,000, possibly closer to $30,000. This was the same month my father claimed he couldn't afford his heart medication without borrowing against retirement savings. I sat in my apartment staring at photo after photo of my family's luxury European vacation while remembering every conversation where they'd made me feel guilty for asking for basic financial support. The depth of their deception was breathtaking. But I still didn't understand the source of their secret wealth. My father's pension and my mother's Social Security wouldn't cover a fraction of these expenses. Amanda certainly wasn't paying for these trips on Gary's regional sales manager salary. The money had to be coming from somewhere else, and I was determined to find out where. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Thompson, my friend from law school, who now specialized in estate litigation. If there were family financial resources that I'd been excluded from, Marcus would help me understand my legal rights. Marcus, I need your professional advice about a potential family matter. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning? I think my parents might be hiding assets that rightfully belong to me. Marcus agreed immediately. Devin, if there's been any financial misconduct involving estates or trusts, we need to investigate thoroughly. Bring whatever documentation you have and I'll review everything. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. I was about to uncover the truth about my family's finances, but I suspected that knowledge was going to change our relationships forever. The photos from Tuscany had shown me that my parents were capable of elaborate deception. Now I needed to discover exactly what they'd been hiding from me and why. Marcus and I met at a coffee shop downtown, far from my office and away from anyone who might recognize us. I brought printed copies of Amanda's social media posts, screenshots from my parents' cloud storage, and notes about their financial claims over the past several months. Marcus reviewed everything with the methodical precision that made him one of Chicago's most successful estate attorneys. After 20 minutes of silent analysis, he looked up with a grim expression. Devin, based on what you've shown me, there are significant financial resources in your family that you're being excluded from. This level of spending requires substantial assets, not the modest retirement income your parents claim to have. I felt vindicated and terrified simultaneously. What do you think is happening? Most likely scenario. There's an inheritance trust fund or other family wealth that's being distributed unequally. Your parents are probably controlling these assets and choosing to benefit Amanda while deliberately keeping you in the dark. Marcus pulled out his laptop. Tell me everything you remember about your grandparents' estate when they passed away. Even small details might be important. I tried to recall conversations from 5 years ago. My grandfather, Robert Sr., mentioned something about setting up trusts for his grandchildren. He said he wanted to make sure Amanda and I would be financially secure, even if our parents faced unexpected hardships. Did he specify amounts or timelines? Not that I remember. My parents handled all the estate planning meetings. They said the legal details were too complicated for us to worry about, and they'd manage everything appropriately. Marcus frowned. That's a red flag. Beneficiaries should be directly involved in understanding their inheritance rights. Let me search probate records for your grandparents' estate. He spent 30 minutes navigating legal databases while I drank coffee and tried to process the implications of what we might discover. Finally, Marcus whistled softly. Devin. I found the estate documents. Your grandparents established substantial trust funds for both you and Amanda. Each trust was initially funded with $250,000. My coffee cup slipped from my hands, clattering onto the table. $250,000. Are you saying I should have inherited $250,000? According to these documents, yes. But here's where it gets complicated. Marcus scrolled through additional pages. The trusts were structured to be distributed when each beneficiary reached 25 years old. Amanda would have received her full inheritance 3 years ago when she turned 25. I calculated quickly. I turned 25 2 years ago. So where's my money? Marcus's expression grew increasingly serious as he read further. There are supplementary documents filed 6 months after the original estate was settled. It appears your trust funds were modified. Modified how? Your parents as trustees filed paperwork claiming that you voluntarily transferred your inheritance to Amanda's children for their future educational expenses. According to these documents, you signed papers agreeing to redirect your $250,000 to Jake and Connor's college funds. I felt like the world was spinning around me. Marcus, I never signed anything like that. I didn't even know the trust fund existed until this conversation. Marcus pulled out his phone and started taking photos of the legal documents. Then we're looking at multiple felonies: fraud, forgery, identity theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. Your parents have stolen your entire inheritance and falsified legal documents to cover their tracks. The magnitude of their betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my parents lied about their financial situation, they'd actively stolen $250,000 that my grandfather intended for me. They'd used my stolen inheritance to fund Amanda's luxury lifestyle while making me feel guilty for asking for basic help. "There's more," Marcus continued grimly. "Amanda signed supplementary documents acknowledging the transfer as a generous gift from her brother. So she knew exactly what was happening. Your entire family conspired to steal your inheritance." I stared at the legal documents, trying to process the scope of the deception. How is this possible? Don't I have legal protections as a beneficiary? You absolutely do, but trustees have significant control over distributions. Your parents exploited that authority and your trust in them to commit fraud. The fact that they forged your signature makes this criminal, not just civil misconduct. Marcus closed his laptop and leaned forward. "Devin, I need you to understand the full implications here. Your parents didn't just lie about being poor. They stole your inheritance, gave it to Amanda's family, and then manipulated you into feeling guilty about their supposed financial struggles. This is one of the most calculated examples of family financial abuse I've seen in 15 years of practice. I felt physically sick. What are my options legally? We can pursue both criminal charges and civil litigation. The forged signatures constitute identity theft and fraud. The unauthorized transfer violates multiple fiduciary laws. We can recover your stolen inheritance with interest and penalties. What about Amanda? She clearly knew the money was supposed to be mine. If she knowingly accepted stolen assets, she's liable for restitution. We can recover everything she's spent plus additional damages." Marcus gathered his notes. "But before we proceed with legal action, I recommend gathering more evidence. We need documentation of how they've been spending your stolen money, proof of their deceptive claims about poverty, and anything else that demonstrates the pattern of abuse." I thought about the photos from Tuscany and Amanda's extravagant social media posts. I can provide extensive documentation of their spending. They've been flaunting their wealth while claiming poverty. Perfect. We'll build an overwhelming case that exposes the full scope of their deception. When we confront them, they'll have no choice but to admit everything and agree to full restitution. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Marcus placed his hand on my shoulder. "Devin, I know this is devastating to learn about your family, but you have legal rights, and we're going to make sure justice is served. Your parents thought they could steal from you without consequences. They're about to discover how wrong they were." I walked back to my office with my mind racing. In the span of one conversation, I'd learned that my family had stolen $250,000 from me, used my inheritance to fund luxury vacations and extravagant spending, and manipulated me into feeling guilty about their supposed financial struggles. But now I knew the truth, and I had legal options for recovering everything they'd stolen. The question was how to proceed strategically. I wanted justice, but I also wanted to make sure they fully understood the consequences of their actions. Marcus had advised gathering more evidence before confronting them directly. I decided to spend the next few weeks documenting everything I could about their deceptive behavior and fraudulent spending. By the time I was finished investigating, my parents would face overwhelming evidence of their crimes. They'd stolen my inheritance, but I was going to make sure they paid for every dollar they'd taken. Over the following 2 weeks, I became obsessed with building an airtight case against my family. I documented every social media post, every expensive purchase, and every conversation where my parents had claimed financial hardship while secretly living off my stolen inheritance. Marcus introduced me to a forensic accountant named David Chen who specialized in tracking fraudulent asset transfers. David reviewed all the evidence I'd gathered and helped me understand the full financial scope of my family's deception. Your parents have been extremely systematic in their fraud. David explained during our meeting. They've used your inheritance to maintain an upper middle class lifestyle while presenting themselves as financially struggling to you. He showed me a detailed analysis he'd prepared. Based on Amanda's documented spending and your parents' luxury purchases, they've blown through approximately $180,000 of your inheritance over the past 3 years. The remaining $70,000 is likely sitting in investment accounts or savings. I felt sick looking at the numbers. They've spent most of my grandfather's gift on vacations and luxury goods. Worse than that, they've been strategically spending your money while manipulating you psychologically. Every time they claimed poverty, they were actually living off your stolen inheritance. It's financial abuse designed to maintain control over you. Marcus joined our conversation with additional legal research. I've identified multiple criminal violations. The forged consent documents constitute identity theft. The fraudulent transfer violates federal wire fraud statutes. The systematic deception while acting as trustees is criminal breach of fiduciary duty. What does that mean in practical terms? Your parents face potential federal charges that could result in significant prison time. Amanda could be charged as an accessory if we can prove she knowingly participated in spending stolen assets. David pulled up Amanda's social media timeline on his laptop. Based on her posting patterns, Amanda began her luxury spending spree immediately after receiving the fraudulent transfer from your trust. She went from posting modest family activities to posting expensive vacations and purchases. She definitely knew where the money was coming from. I studied the timeline David had created. The correlation between Amanda receiving my stolen inheritance and her sudden lifestyle upgrade was undeniable. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Devin, we have enough evidence to pursue this case aggressively. But I want to discuss strategy before we proceed. We can file criminal complaints immediately, or we can confront your family first and give them an opportunity to make this right voluntarily. What would you recommend? Personally, I think a confrontation might be more satisfying for you emotionally. Let them know that you've discovered everything and give them a chance to explain themselves before we involve law enforcement. David nodded agreement. From a financial recovery standpoint, voluntary restitution is often faster than waiting for criminal proceedings. If they agree to return everything immediately, you could have your money back within weeks instead of months. I considered both options carefully. Part of me wanted my parents to face the full criminal consequences of their actions. They'd stolen from me, lied to me, and manipulated me for years. Justice demanded punishment. But another part of me hoped there might be some explanation I hadn't considered. Maybe they'd made terrible decisions without fully understanding the legal implications. Maybe they genuinely believed they were acting in the family's best interests somehow. Let's confront them first, I decided. I want to hear them try to explain how they justified stealing my inheritance. If they refuse to make full restitution immediately, then we file criminal charges. Marcus smiled grimly. I like that approach. We'll prepare all the criminal paperwork in advance, so if they don't cooperate, we can file everything within hours. How do you want to handle the confrontation? I recommend doing it somewhere they'll feel comfortable enough to be honest, but also somewhere that ensures your safety. They might become desperate or angry when they realize their fraud has been exposed. I thought about logistics. What if I invite them for dinner at my apartment? I could present it as wanting to have a family discussion about our relationships. That could work, but I want you wearing a wire during the conversation. We need recorded evidence of whatever they say, especially if they admit to the fraud or try to justify their actions. David offered additional practical advice. Make sure you have copies of all the evidence secured in multiple locations. If they realize how much trouble they're in, they might try to destroy documentation or interfere with our case. Marcus stood up and gathered his files. Give me 1 week to prepare all the criminal paperwork and get the recording equipment set up. Then we'll schedule your family dinner and expose everything they've done. As I left that meeting, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. In 1 week, I would confront my parents with evidence of their crimes and give them the opportunity to confess. Part of me hoped they would take responsibility and try to make amends. But based on their elaborate deception over the past several years, I suspected they would continue lying until they had no choice but to face the legal consequences of their actions. I spent the rest of that week mentally preparing for the confrontation. I practiced staying calm while presenting devastating evidence. I rehearsed what I would say if they tried to deny or minimize their fraud. Most importantly, I prepared myself for the possibility that this conversation would permanently destroy my relationships with my parents and sister. They'd stolen from me and lied to me, but they were still my family. After next week's dinner, that might not be true anymore. I decided to wait until Thanksgiving to execute my plan. The holiday would provide perfect cover for a family gathering, and the timing felt symbolically appropriate. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude and family unity. Instead, I would be serving my family a feast of justice alongside the turkey. I called my parents in early November with my invitation. I've been thinking a lot about our family relationships lately, and I want to host Thanksgiving dinner at my apartment this year. Just the 5 of us, you, Mom, Amanda, Gary, and me. My mother, Patricia, sounded delighted. Oh, Devin, that's wonderful. We haven't had a family Thanksgiving in years. Are you sure you want to handle all that cooking? I'm absolutely sure. I want to create some positive memories and focus on what we're grateful for as a family. My father, Robert, got on the phone. Son, this means so much to us. After all the stress we've been under with medical bills and financial pressures, it'll be nice to have something to celebrate. I almost laughed at his continued performance of poverty. Even now, with Thanksgiving 3 weeks away, he was maintaining the fiction that they were struggling financially. The audacity was breathtaking. I called Amanda too, and she's excited about the dinner. She said Gary's looking forward to some family time as well. Perfect. This is going to be a very memorable Thanksgiving for all of us. Marcus spent 2 weeks preparing for the confrontation. He obtained high-quality recording equipment that would capture every word of our dinner conversation. He prepared legal documents, copies of the original trust fund paperwork evidence, of the forged consent forms documentation, of Amanda's luxury spending funded by my stolen inheritance, and criminal complaints ready for immediate filing. Remember, the goal is to get them talking, Marcus advised during our final preparation meeting. Let them explain their actions in their own words. The more they say, the stronger our case becomes. What if they refuse to admit anything? Then we have recordings of them continuing to lie in the face of overwhelming evidence. That actually makes our criminal case stronger. David provided me with a detailed summary of their financial crimes that I could reference during the dinner. The total stolen amount, including interest and penalties, now exceeded $300,000. If they agree to immediate full restitution, we can probably avoid criminal prosecution, David explained. But if they refuse or try to negotiate a partial settlement, we proceed with federal charges immediately. The morning of Thanksgiving, I prepared an elaborate meal. Roasted turkey with herb stuffing, garlic, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie for dessert. I wanted everything to be perfect before I destroyed their world. Marcus positioned himself in a surveillance van outside my apartment building. He would monitor the recording equipment and be ready to call law enforcement if the confrontation escalated beyond verbal arguments. My parents arrived first, carrying flowers and a bottle of wine. My mother hugged me warmly. Devin, this is so thoughtful of you to bring the family together. My father surveyed the dinner preparations approvingly. You've really outdone yourself, son. This looks like a restaurant-quality meal. Amanda and Gary arrived 30 minutes later with the twins. Jake and Connor ran around my apartment excitedly, while Amanda admired the table settings. This is beautiful, Devin. I had no idea you were such a good host. Gary shook my hand enthusiastically. Thanks for including us in this. It's been too long since we've had proper family time. I served dinner courses methodically, maintaining cheerful conversation, while the recording equipment captured every word. My parents continued their performance of financial stress, mentioning how grateful they were for simple pleasures like family meals during difficult times. Amanda talked about the boys' school activities and Gary's work projects, carefully avoiding any mention of their recent expensive purchases or luxury vacations. As I cleared the dinner plates, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Before we have dessert, I want to talk about something important with everyone. I returned from the kitchen carrying a manila envelope instead of pie. I've been doing some reflection about our family relationships lately, and I've discovered some things that I think we need to discuss honestly. I pulled the first document from the envelope, a copy of my grandfather's original trust fund paperwork. Mom, Dad, do you remember when Grandpa Robert set up trust funds for Amanda and me before he passed away? The color drained from my father's face. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. Amanda looked confused. What trust funds? I don't know what you're talking about. I smiled gently at my sister's performance. Really, you don't remember signing documents 3 years ago, acknowledging a generous gift from your brother, documents related to educational funds for Jake and Connor? Now Amanda's face went pale as well. I continued pulling documents from the envelope. Because I have copies of everything right here. The original trust funds that Grandpa established. The forged consent forms claiming I agreed to transfer my inheritance to Amanda's children. Bank records showing how my stolen money has been spent over the past 3 years. Gary looked frantically between Amanda and my parents. What is he talking about? What consent forms? I laid out photographs from my parents' Tuscany vacation and printouts from Amanda's social media posts. I'm talking about the fact that you've all been living off my stolen inheritance while lying to my face about financial hardship. My father tried to speak, but I held up my hand. I know about the $250,000 that Grandpa left for me. I know you forged my signature to transfer it to Amanda's family. I know you've spent most of it on luxury vacations, expensive dinners, and first-class flights while making me feel guilty for asking for basic help with my student loans. My mother started crying. Devin, you don't understand? We thought we were doing what was best for the family. Best for which family members, because it seems like everyone benefited except me. Amanda finally found her voice. I didn't know the money was supposed to be yours. Mom and Dad told me it was an early inheritance that they wanted me to have. I looked directly at her. Amanda, you signed documents specifically acknowledging it as a gift from me. You knew exactly where that money came from. Gary stood up abruptly. Are you telling me that our entire lifestyle for the past 3 years has been funded by stolen money? Before anyone could answer, Marcus walked through my front door accompanied by a court bailiff. Good evening, everyone. I'm Marcus Thompson, Devin's attorney. I have some legal documents that need to be served to the family. The stunned silence in my apartment was absolute. My parents looked like they'd seen a ghost. Amanda started hyperventilating. Gary sat down heavily, his face buried in his hands. Marcus placed legal papers in front of each family member. These are criminal complaints for fraud, identity theft, and violation of fiduciary duty. You have the right to legal representation, and anything you say can be used against you in court. I looked around the table at my family's shocked faces. I gave you all the opportunity to explain yourselves voluntarily. Now we're going to resolve this through the legal system. The Thanksgiving dinner I'd planned as a moment of family unity had become the moment when my family's lies finally caught up with them. Justice was about to be served, and it was going to be much more bitter than anything I'd prepared in the kitchen. The week following Thanksgiving became a whirlwind of legal proceedings that exposed my family's fraud to the entire community. Marcus filed criminal complaints with both local and federal authorities, while David began the process of freezing assets to prevent my parents and Amanda from hiding remaining funds. The initial arraignments were scheduled for the Monday after Thanksgiving. I sat in the courtroom gallery watching my parents and sister appear before a federal magistrate to hear charges of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. My father Robert wore his best suit, but he looked frail and confused as the prosecutor read the charges against him. My mother Patricia clutched a tissue and kept glancing toward me with pleading eyes. Amanda appeared separately with a public defender since Gary had immediately filed for divorce and refused to pay for her legal representation. The magnitude of their crimes was finally sinking in as she realized she might face federal prison time. The local media picked up the story within days because of my father's position on the city council and my mother's volunteer work with several prominent charities. Local family accused of inheritance fraud became front-page news in our suburban newspaper. The article detailed how my parents had served as trustees for their grandson's education funds while simultaneously stealing their own son's inheritance to fund luxury vacations and extravagant spending. The contrast between their public personas as upstanding community members and their private criminal behavior created a sensation. My father was immediately suspended from the city council pending resolution of the criminal charges. The mayor issued a statement saying the city could not allow someone facing fraud charges to participate in municipal financial decisions. My mother was asked to resign from her positions with the local Children's Hospital Auxiliary and the community food bank. The irony of someone stealing money from her own child being removed from charitable organizations was not lost on local observers. Amanda's social media accounts, which had documented years of luxury purchases funded by my stolen money, became evidence in the criminal proceedings. Prosecutors used her Instagram posts to demonstrate the systematic spending of fraudulently obtained assets. The most devastating revelation came when investigators discovered that Amanda's husband, Gary, had unknowingly been filing tax returns that failed to report the stolen inheritance money as income. The Internal Revenue Service opened a separate investigation for tax fraud, even though Gary appeared to be an innocent victim of his wife's criminal activity. Gary's divorce attorney moved quickly to distance him from Amanda's crimes. My client had no knowledge that his wife was spending stolen money. He believed her parents were legitimately helping the family financially during difficult times. The divorce proceedings became contentious when Gary demanded custody of Jake and Connor based on Amanda's criminal behavior. He argued that someone facing federal fraud charges could not provide a stable environment for their children. Amanda was forced to move in with my parents while awaiting trial, since she could no longer afford her mortgage payments without access to my stolen money. The house she'd purchased with fraudulent funds went into foreclosure within months. My parents' legal bills quickly exhausted their legitimate savings. They were forced to hire a public defender after their initial attorney withdrew when they couldn't pay his retainer fee. The community reaction was swift and merciless. People who had respected my parents for decades felt personally betrayed when they learned about the family fraud. The local newspaper published letters from community members expressing outrage at my parents' criminal behavior. One letter particularly captured the public sentiment. How can we trust anything Robert and Patricia have done in public service when they were stealing from their own son? If they'll commit fraud against their own family, what have they been doing with public resources? The social isolation became complete when my parents' longtime friends began avoiding them. People who had socialized with them for years suddenly crossed the street rather than make conversation. Amanda faced similar ostracism when parents at Jake and Connor's school learned about her criminal charges. Other families stopped inviting the twins to birthday parties and play dates. The boys began asking difficult questions about why their friends weren't allowed to visit anymore. Marcus kept me informed about the legal proceedings while we worked on recovering my stolen inheritance. Your family's facing overwhelming evidence, he explained during one of our weekly meetings. The forged documents, the financial records, and their own recorded admissions from Thanksgiving dinner make conviction virtually certain. What kind of sentences are they looking at? Your parents could face 3 to 5 years in federal prison, depending on their cooperation with restitution. Amanda might get a shorter sentence if she demonstrates genuine remorse and full cooperation. David provided updates on asset recovery. We've identified most of the remaining funds from your trust. Your parents still have about $60,000 in various accounts. Amanda spent the rest, but she owns assets that can be liquidated to pay restitution. Will I recover the full amount? You'll recover your original inheritance plus interest and penalties. The court will also award damages for the emotional distress and financial harm caused by their fraud. You're looking at total recovery of approximately $350,000. As the legal proceedings progressed, I struggled with complicated emotions about my family's downfall. I felt vindicated that the truth had finally emerged, but I also felt sad about the destruction of relationships I'd valued despite their fundamental dishonesty. My parents made several attempts to contact me directly, but Marcus advised against any communication outside of legal proceedings. Anything you say to them could complicate our case, he warned. Let the legal system handle this completely. The most difficult moment came when Jake and Connor sent me a handwritten note through their father, Gary. Uncle Devin, we're sorry our mom took your money. We didn't know it was wrong. We miss you. The innocence of their message broke my heart. The twins had been unknowing beneficiaries of stolen funds, but they were also victims of their mother's crimes. They would grow up knowing their lifestyle had been built on fraud committed against their uncle. Gary reached out to me directly to express his genuine remorse. Devin, I had no idea what Amanda was doing. If I had known that money was stolen from you, I would never have allowed our family to benefit from it. I believed Gary's sincerity. He had been deceived as thoroughly as I had been, and now he was dealing with the consequences of crimes he hadn't committed. I'm filing for full custody of the boys, Gary continued. I want to make sure they understand that what their mother did was wrong, and I want them to have a relationship with you when this is all resolved. That conversation gave me hope that something positive might emerge from the legal destruction of my family relationships. The twins deserve to grow up understanding the difference between right and wrong, and they deserve to know their uncle despite their mother's crimes. As we approached the plea hearing dates, Marcus prepared me for the possibility that my family members might receive relatively light sentences in exchange for full restitution and cooperation. Federal judges often prioritize financial recovery for victims over long prison sentences, especially for first-time offenders with family responsibilities, Marcus explained. I want them to face appropriate consequences for what they did, I replied. But I also want my money back and some assurance that they understand the seriousness of their actions. The legal proceedings had exposed my family's fraud to the entire community and forced them to confront the consequences of their criminal behavior. Now we would see whether they were capable of genuine remorse and meaningful change. 6 months after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, I sat in my apartment opening a bank deposit slip for $347,000. The final restitution payment for my family's criminal case had been processed, officially ending the most difficult period of my adult life. The legal resolution had come faster than anyone expected. My parents pled guilty to fraud charges in exchange for probation, community service, and full financial restitution. At their ages, the federal prosecutor decided that public humiliation and financial consequences were more appropriate than prison time. Amanda received 18 months of supervised probation after demonstrating genuine remorse and cooperating completely with asset recovery. She was required to attend financial counseling and perform 300 hours of community service. The judge's final statement during sentencing had captured the essence of their crimes perfectly. You violated the most fundamental trust that exists between family members. You exploited your roles as parents and trustees to steal from your own child and grandchild. The damage to family relationships may be permanent, but the legal consequences reflect society's commitment to protecting inheritance rights. My father, Robert, had been permanently removed from the city council and barred from holding any public office. The community had made clear that someone who committed fraud against family could never be trusted with public responsibilities. My mother, Patricia, had quietly withdrawn from all volunteer activities and seemed to have aged years during the legal proceedings. The woman who had once been active in community organizations now rarely left her house except for court-mandated counseling sessions. Amanda had lost her house to foreclosure and was living in a small apartment while working as a cashier at a grocery store. The lifestyle funded by my stolen inheritance had vanished, completely replaced by the financial struggles she should have experienced years earlier. Gary had been awarded full custody of Jake and Connor after demonstrating that he was an innocent victim of Amanda's crimes. He had also been helpful in recovering assets and documenting the extent of fraudulent spending. The twins were now living with Gary in a modest but stable environment. He had established a college savings account for them using legitimate funds and had committed to teaching them about financial responsibility and ethical behavior. Most importantly, Gary had facilitated a gradual rebuilding of my relationship with Jake and Connor. The boys were slowly learning that their previous lifestyle had been built on stolen money, and they were adjusting to more modest family circumstances. Uncle Devin, Jake, had said during a recent visit, "Dad explained that Mom took money that wasn't hers. We want to pay you back when we get jobs." The genuine remorse from 8-year-old children highlighted the moral blindness their mother had demonstrated for years. My relationship with my parents was slowly healing, but it would never return to what it had been before. The foundation of trust had been permanently damaged by their willingness to steal from me while manipulating me emotionally. My father had written me a long letter attempting to explain their actions. We convinced ourselves that we were managing family resources for everyone's benefit. We thought you were financially stable and didn't need the inheritance immediately, while Amanda was struggling with the costs of raising young children. We know now that our reasoning was completely wrong, but we genuinely believed we were doing what was best for the whole family. I appreciated his attempt at explanation, but I couldn't forget that they had forged legal documents and lied to my face for years. Trust, once broken so completely, could only be rebuilt through consistent actions over time. My mother's approach to reconciliation had been different. She focused on acknowledging the emotional damage they had caused rather than justifying their financial decisions. "Devin, we made you feel like a burden when you asked for help, while we were secretly spending money that belonged to you. We made you doubt your worth as a family member while treating Amanda like she could do no wrong. The financial fraud was terrible, but the psychological manipulation might have been even worse. Her willingness to confront the emotional aspects of their abuse had been more healing than my father's focus on financial justifications. Amanda's path to redemption had been the most difficult. She had initially tried to minimize her role by claiming she was just following our parents' guidance. But her court-mandated counseling had forced her to confront her active participation in spending money she knew was stolen from me. I was so caught up in the lifestyle and the social status that I didn't want to ask questions about where the money was coming from, she admitted during one of our supervised meetings. I knew it didn't make sense for Mom and Dad to suddenly have unlimited resources, but I chose not to think about it because I liked the benefits. Her honesty about her willful ignorance had been painful but necessary for any possibility of rebuilding our relationship. The community consequences had also been severe and lasting. My family's fraud had become a cautionary tale about financial abuse and family betrayal. Local newspapers occasionally referenced their case when covering other white-collar crime stories. But the public shame had also led to some positive outcomes. The City Council had implemented new financial oversight procedures to prevent future misconduct by elected officials. Local banks had improved their fraud detection systems for trust fund management. Several families had contacted Marcus after learning about our case, reporting similar suspicions about inheritance fraud by their own relatives. My willingness to pursue legal action had apparently inspired other victims to seek justice. As I reflected on the past year, I realized that uncovering my family's fraud had taught me invaluable lessons about relationships, boundaries, and self-worth. The most important lesson was that family relationships must be based on honesty and mutual respect, not blind loyalty. My parents had exploited my trust and love for them to commit crimes against me. Learning to prioritize my own well-being over family harmony had been difficult but necessary. I had also learned that financial abuse is often accompanied by psychological manipulation. My parents hadn't just stolen money from me, they had systematically undermined my confidence and made me feel guilty for having legitimate needs and expectations. Setting clear boundaries with family members who had violated my trust was ongoing work. I was willing to rebuild relationships gradually, but only if they demonstrated consistent respect for my rights and feelings. The financial recovery had been substantial, but the emotional growth had been even more valuable. I now understood my worth as a person wasn't dependent on my family's approval or treatment of me. Looking toward the future, I felt cautiously optimistic about our family's potential for healing. My parents were attending counseling and had shown genuine remorse for their actions. Amanda was working to rebuild her life based on honest principles rather than stolen resources. The twins were adapting well to their new circumstances and maintaining a relationship with me despite their mother's crimes against me. Gary had become an unexpected ally in ensuring they grew up understanding right from wrong. Most importantly, I had learned to advocate for myself and demand the respect I deserved from family members. The shy, guilty person who had accepted my parents' claims of poverty while they secretly spent my inheritance was gone forever. In his place was someone who understood that love and respect must flow in both directions, even within families. Someone who would never again allow others to exploit his kindness or manipulate his emotions for their financial benefit. The stolen inheritance had been recovered with interest and penalties. But the self-respect and personal boundaries I had gained through this experience were worth far more than any dollar amount. As I prepared to invest my recovered inheritance in my future goals, I realized that my grandfather's final gift to me hadn't just been financial resources. Through the legal battle to recover those resources, I had discovered the strength and determination to demand justice when I was wronged. That knowledge would serve me well for the rest of my life, long after the money was spent on worthwhile goals he would have supported. The painful lesson was complete family love without honest respect is meaningless, but justice earned through courage creates lasting change. Before I close this story, I want to ask you something that's been on my mind since this whole experience began. Have you ever felt like you were being treated unfairly by your own family members? Maybe not to this extreme, but situations where you felt like you weren't getting the same level of support or respect that others received? I'm curious about your experiences because I've learned that family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and sometimes we need to speak up for ourselves, even when it feels uncomfortable. If you found this story helpful or relatable, I'd really appreciate it if you could like this video to help others find it. Please subscribe to my channel for more stories about standing up for yourself and dealing with difficult family situations. And if you think someone you know might benefit from hearing about how I handled this betrayal, please share this video with them. Thank you so much for listening to my story and for all the support you've shown. I hope that whatever challenges you're facing in your own relationships, you'll remember that you deserve to be treated with honesty and respect. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.